Hello and welcome to our third ever episode of Murder She Streamed. This is going to be our first recorded episode. It just allows for better time, and this way we can post them as premieres and people can join in the story as well in the chat. Our topic today is the Long Island serial killer, also known as the Gilgo Beach murderer. I do have my friend Fanta with me here. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody.
Fanta, you said that you've been following this kind of addictively for the last few days and falling asleep to podcasts and stuff.
Yes, I've tried to watch everything I can, and then I'll go to sleep listening to it.
Nice.
I need to talk about it.
It's a very, very long, involved story with a lot of details involving a lot of victims. And so far, one suspect, and there's even been some recent information that's come out in the last, say, 24 to 48 hours, updates that are linking the current suspect to two more. So let's kind of dive in here with a video. I just have a small introductory video to give a tiny little bit of an outline on the story, and then we'll start to jump into the timeline on this.
All right.
People who live there. No one is ever going to think that that's a bad, dangerous area, but it is.
The chief of detectives calls and says they have found another body, and then sometime later he calls and says we found another body, and then another one.
The crimes may be the work of more than one serial killer.
They're going to find more bodies because a serial killer doesn't stop killing. He keeps killing till he gets caught.
The first four victims were young women, found just miles from where a fifth vanished after a terrified call to 911.
When me and my mom got that phone call that Megan was missing, I knew that if they found her, it wasn't going to be a happy outcome. Mother's instinct.
As their families search for answers, we ask, who were these women? Why were four of them hidden side by side on a Long Island beach? And who is the killer still out there?
Right now, all right, for anyone to come out and say that it's a specific person, a specific occupation, or a specific type, I think it is unfair, and I think it's mere suspicion, it's mere speculation. All right, right now it could be anybody.
And there you have it. There's a little bit of information from when this case really started to take on some interest and before there was ever an actual suspect that had at least been made known in the media. So we are going to start from the very beginning of this story and go through step by step. Let me just add this to the screen here. This is the young lady that sort of started everything, and it starts with her disappearance. This is Shannon Gilbert. She was 25 years old at the time. She was actually an aspiring actress from Jersey City, New Jersey, but ended up working as a sex worker and was reported missing on Long Island. In May of 2010 is when she actually disappeared. So before we talk about any other victims or related deaths, I do want to take a moment to really go over the strange occurrences related to Shannon's disappearance and her subsequent death. To start off Shannon Gilbert's timeline, May 1st is pretty much where this is May 1st of 2010, I believe, is when she was had vanished, actually went missing, not reported missing, but when she actually went missing. This is a little bit older, so of course it's been adjusted over time to reflect, facts that they found out over the years after her body was found. But on May 1st, she meets a client in Midtown Manhattan and ends up meeting with her driver. His name is Michael Pack. And we're actually going to play parts of a 911 call from Shannon. And he's actually on that call with her, trying to actually coax her out of this house that she won't come out of. But so she has an appointment to meet a client on Long Island And so he actually drives her to Oak Beach for the appointment with a client named Joseph Brewer. He's very, very wealthy man, lives in the Gilgo Beach, Long Island area. And so her driver and she actually arrive in Oak Beach, which is the neighborhood that Joseph Brewer's house is in. And she goes inside the house while Pac, her driver, remain in the SUV. This was their routine. This was how all of the calls were done. She would have a driver for protection and security, but he would remain outside in the car until she was done. And then he would drop her off at home and he would get paid for doing that as well. So it says that about 2:30 a.m., shortly after they arrived, Shannon and Brewer, her call, left the house in his vehicle for about 15 minutes. Doesn't say why, and I don't think it's ever been revealed why. At 2:55 a.m., this would have been after they returned, Shannon calls a CVS in West Islip, New York, and then she makes a phone call just a few minutes later to the driver, and then they have some phone calls back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is supposedly in the time where she sort of gets disoriented and starts talking nonsensically, according to Pac, and he's trying to get her to come out of the house. She becomes agitated, says, "You guys are trying to kill me." Pac actually goes into the house to try to get her out because Brewer says he just can't get her out of the house. She's actually hiding behind a sofa. And she makes a call to 911. It lasts 23 minutes from 4:51 to 5:14 a.m. The call was transferred to New York State Police instead of the Suffolk County Police. And then this recording, which her family actually fought to get released, was actually released to the public. And we have some excerpts from it. So after trying to coax Shannon outside at about 4:55, it's almost 5 a.m. He's trying to get her to come out of the house. He's out in the vehicle, actually sees her come out of the house and fall down the front stairs. She's running from house to house, knocking on neighbors' doors while she's actually on the call on 911, so they can hear her knocking on doors, and several of the neighbors start calling 911 for her. But basically, the call ends at 5:14 a.m. Shannon's seen running towards the brush. That's the last that she's heard. The call, you hear her scream at the end of the call, and then you hear what sounds like rustling around her, as if she's running into what they call brush, which is really, really tall, sort of head high, depending on how tall you are, just really, really thick brush and marsh, like wet and muddy.
Mm.
That's kind of where her timeline ends. And she was searched for years. And it was actually the search for her body that made it possible for them to find the other victims. And again, this is Shannon Gilbert. So what's your recollection, Fanta, of what you know about Shannon Gilbert?
Well, I know that she was small and petite. She's very pretty. I don't know why, but when they put all the victims up, she's the one I hone in on every time.
Mm-hmm. She's got a very striking look to her.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel so bad for her and everyone else. But man, I've heard the call. And it just sounds so disoriented and not in her head.
Right.
That it makes you wonder, was something spiked that she was drinking or something? That's where I go with it.
She does sound like she's in danger, but then you kind of think when you hear her bodyguard on the call as well, sort of in the background saying, "What are you doing?" Like he's completely confused as to why she's acting this way, and just telling her, "Let's go home, let's go home." But let's go ahead and we'll play that 911 call here so everybody gets an idea of what we're talking about.
Okay.
Suffolk County today released those tapes, hoping to help unravel the 12-year-old Gilgo Beach mystery. Today, a bit of a shocking finding. Police now say that they do not believe that Shannon Gilbert's death is a case of murder.
But they hope this and other evidence they decided to release today will help them solve what has been a rather embarrassingly long unsolved cases of mass murder, the murders or other kinds of deaths of 7 other people in Suffolk County and 3 others in Nassau County.
Eyewitness News reporter Kristen Thorne is live in Brentwood with our lead story tonight. Kristen.
Liz and Bill, police have been saying for quite some time that they weren't exactly sure if Gilbert was murdered or if she died in a marsh near Gilgo Beach. But after hearing these calls today, it does sound like that is a possible scenario.
No, stop it, please. Stop it, please. Please stop it. Please stop it. No.
In the 23-minute 911 phone call released by police from 2010, we hear Shannon Gilbert go from scared for her life to confused.
Why are you calling me by my name?
What's the matter? Are you okay?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do to me?
Let's go back to Manhattan.
Police say that's the voice of Michael Pack, Gilbert's bodyguard. Police say Pack drove Gilbert to the home of Joseph Brewer in Ocean Beach. Brewer had hired Gilbert, who was a sex worker.
At some point during the meeting with Brewer, Shannon reportedly began acting irrational.
Please, can you shut the door?
No, why don't you go?
Please, something's going to happen to me.
There's nobody outside. You're okay, right?
After that, Gilbert runs out of the house. She starts knocking on people's doors. Those people call 911 too.
43 the Bayou. Some woman is knocking at my door. She says she's in danger.
The last thing we hear on the call is Gilbert running again. Police say they believe Gilbert ran into this marsh in Gilgo, which would have looked like this at the time that night. They believe that's where Gilbert died.
Right now, we believe it's a tragic accident.
Police do not believe Gilbert's death is related to the murders of other sex workers whose remains were later found in Gilgo. For the first time, they're explaining why.
In this case, she's found on the south side of the parkway. In all the other cases, they're found on the north side of the parkway. In this case, our victim called 911. None of the other cases resulted in 911 calls. She's found with her identification with her. She's found with money with her, with cash with her. There's no effort to conceal her body.
How about that?
Mm.
Very interesting. And they think that it's just plain not related up to this point, though, because at the very end, there's some new information that's come out that might be interesting to learn. However,
Yeah.
she was found much further, and it did look as though and sound as though she went into the brush and then they call it succumbing to the elements. She either froze to death or she had passed out and drowned, because I guess she was found in a really watery area. And she was nothing but a skeleton, basically, when they found her. She had been missing for quite some time when they finally did discover her body. Sad, but also perhaps, she's become sort of a hero because she's allowed for these other girls to be discovered. So as we go through, this is Joseph Brewer and the house that she went to. So while searching for her, that's when they discovered the 4 other bodies in December of that year between Cedar Beach and Gilgo Beach on the north end of Jones Beach Island. It prompted a wider police search, eventually leading to the discovery of more remains. Ultimately, 9 women, including Miss Gilbert, a man and a toddler, were discovered in the area. And investigators at the time said that they did believe a serial killer was responsible for all those deaths because all of the women had worked as sex workers.
Yeah.
So Gilbert's remains were actually found in December of 2011, but that's where at the time they said that they didn't think that her death was linked because of the differences and then also the evidence from the 911 recording. Go ahead.
Did you watch, I can't remember who it was, but I watched one documentary. LMN is the channel, I think. It's where these guys go out.
Lifetime Movie Network?
Oh, could be, yeah. Where they went out there, and the top guy on it, he said that there's like briars and things in that marsh, and that, you wouldn't, he said she could have ran through it and bled to death because it would have cut her up.
Right. Right. And
But-
it was muddy, it was watery, and really, if you're disoriented, and especially if there had been something wrong with her, something in her system, had she been drugged, whatever the case, did she have a mental breakdown? Did something happen? It would be really, really easy to get lost in there and feel like there just is no way to find your way out.
Yeah. And again, if she passed out from whatever substance or whatever in the water, and if the water came up, So
they had to bring in heavy equipment to clear it out in order for the searchers to even be able to get through it.
Mm-hmm.
So a tiny little girl, barely dressed, with nothing but her cell phone, and if that went dead, who knows?
Yeah.
So here's a good idea right here of what the beach line looks like in reference to Midtown Manhattan, which was where a lot of these sex workers, they eventually linked calls from burner phones back to Midtown Manhattan, which is where the calls were being made to set up the meetings with the girls. And then later finding their bodies out on this long strip. And if you look at it from this sense, if you're living in the city or anywhere else in a populated area where these prostitutes are working, this looks like the ideal place, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
just this long stretch beachside. And then when you see the property, like the satellite views of the properties around, yeah, there's a lot of hidden areas on that one long straight stretch of road where you could
Yeah.
easily dispose. And it looks as though someone has definitely done that.
It's very, very dark.
So this is the total of the victims that were found. Only these first 4 listed here, Melissa Bartholomew, Amberlynn Costello, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, and Megan Waterman, have a main suspect in their cases. The rest could be related or could also be unrelated, and there could be a second person, because there are some things such as burlap sacks that 3 of the 4 victims were found in, the Gilgo 4, that link them to the current suspect. The others either did not, or they only found, just small parts of them. They did link this woman here, the name Peaches, to the female toddler, and they believe that the toddler is Peaches, as she was known, is the mother. The Asian male was found dressed in female clothing. So could it have been a situation where this male was working as a sex worker and was killed? It's possible. Jane Doe was known as Jane Doe for a really, really long time, but they actually just released her identity, and her name is Karen Vergata. And we do have a little bit of information on her as we move on. So here is the suspect. And I don't know if you can see how tall this man is, how huge he is. I mean, that's a massive, towering, just mega massive a man.
They said he's 6'4", 6'5", something like that.
Yeah, I think 6'4" is what I heard. So nearly 13 years after the first victim was discovered, they finally named a suspect. His name is Rex Heuermann. He's a New York City architect. He has been charged with the murders of Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. They are part of the Gilgo 4, and they were the ones whose bodies were found covered in burlap back in December of 2010. So he's 59 years old. He's a married father of 2. He's also the prime suspect in the death of a 4th victim, which is Maureen Brainerd Barnes. She is the other victim, the other part of the Gilgo 4. She was found that month, and according to the court document, he's certainly not been charged with her murder yet, but charges hopefully are pending. Those 4 victims became known as the Gilgo 4, and they were actually Craigslist escorts. They were found along the beach about 500 feet from each other, and all died by homicidal violence, according to officials. And these are just some photos of those searches for those girls. This is the Gilgo 4. And then we start with the first victim, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, 25. She was last seen alive in New York City, according to prosecutors. She's one of the Gilgo 4. This is another member of the Gilgo 4, Melissa Bartholomew. He's been charged in her death. She was, went missing on July 10th, 2009. She was 24, last seen in New York City. And then on May 1st, 2010, Shannon Gilbert, 23, goes missing after fleeing from the client's home in Oak Beach, near Gilgo Beach. And her disappearance is the one that prompts all of the searches in the area and the discovery of the other bodies. This is Megan Waterman. She's also one of the Gilgo 4. She was 22. She was last seen alive at a Holiday Inn in New York, according to prosecutors. And there's actually footage of her in the lobby waiting to be picked up. Amber Costello, also part of the Gilgo 4. She was 27. She was last seen alive in her home in West Babylon, New York. And then on December 11th, an officer conducting a search for Shannon Gilbert with his police canine along Ocean Parkway in Gilgo Beach near her last known location discovers a set of human remains that are later identified to be those of Melissa Bartholomew. December 13th of 2010, during a search of the area, police find the remains of Brainerd Barnes, Waterman, and Costello within a quarter mile of where Bartholomew's remains were uncovered. So amid the continued search for Gilbert, police find partial skeletal remains several miles east of where the Gilgo Beach 4 were found, belonging to Jessica Taylor. This is Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old sex worker. Other remains from Taylor were previously discovered in Manorville in eastern Long Island in July of 2003. So she was one that had her remains sort of scattered. Police also find 3 sets of remains along Ocean Parkway while searching for Gilbert on April 4th of 2011. And the remains of Valerie Mack, a 24-year-old escort who disappeared while living in the Philadelphia area, are found a mile and a half east of Taylor's remains and a little over 2 miles east of the Gilgo 4. Her partial remains were previously discovered in Manorville in December of 2011, and police have suggested there might be a connection to Jessica Taylor's remains, who was the girl that we just showed previously. Then you have remains of an unidentified female toddler located in the same area, which we talked about. The remains of an unidentified man, the Asian male, discovered along that beach side as well. And authorities said he was about 17 to 23 years old, Asian, and died 5 to 10 years before being discovered. So that's a long time. 2 sets of remains are located off Ocean Parkway in Nassau County, 7 miles west of Gilgo Beach. 1 set of remains is determined to be the mother of the female toddler. That was Peaches, the victim that was found and is the mother of the female toddler. Her partial remains, the mother, were first discovered in 1997 in Hempstead Lake State Park. The second set, known as Jane Doe 7, also known as Fire Island Jane Doe, that's the one that was actually discovered to be Karen Vergara. On December 11, 2011, Shannon Gilbert's remains are finally found in marshland near Oak Beach. Her death is later ruled an accidental drowning, though her family does maintain that they believe she was murdered. How do you feel about that so far? The connection or the non-connection with Shannon Gilbert?
Well, you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can look at it as kind of like a hero. I know that sounds funny, but if it weren't for her, none of these families would know about their daughters, mothers, sisters. So her taking off like that led to the discovery of these other women that had been missing. So it brought some comfort to the family. So you could look at it like that, but then you can look at it like I said before, I think she was drugged or something, and I don't know. I never thought that she just went out there and died.
Yeah, it's very suspicious.
Yeah. I don't believe that.
Especially just because there are so little details. What I'm hoping is that, and we'll get into this a little bit more because even I'm jumping ahead, where he is suspected to have some involvement with her, and that would be very interesting, Rex Heuermann. So in January of 2022, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office created a task force to conduct a comprehensive review of evidence in the investigation. It was less than 6 months later, on March 14th, 2022, Heuermann actually comes up as the first suspect in the investigation. He was tracked through his car, a Chevy Avalanche. That was from a statement that was taken from a witness, and a witness to Amber Costello's disappearance. That's who that was. It was her roommate that reported seeing a Chevy Avalanche at her home.
Tonight, investigators are uncovering new evidence after arresting a suspected serial killer on New York's Long Island. CBS's Elaine Quijano tonight has the shocking new details about what police found inside his home.
Tonight, police say they found over 200 guns in a vault in the basement of accused serial killer Rex Heuermann's Long Island home and are executing search warrants at multiple nearby storage facilities looking for more evidence or trophies from his alleged victims.
To think this guy was roaming around our community for so long is truly frightening.
Heuermann was arrested Thursday night.
Rex, did you do it?
And charged with the murders of 3 women, all sex workers. He is also the prime suspect in the murder of a 4th, which prosecutors feel confident they can tie him to. Their bodies were found within a quarter mile of each other near Gilgo Beach in late 2010.
Mr. Heuermann had a double life. I guess at nighttime he turned into this monster.
Police honed in on Heuermann in March 2022 after discovering he owned a truck, an eyewitness connected to one of the disappearances. CBS News has confirmed investigators recovered a car linked to the suspect in South Carolina. Over time, they also found data from 7 burner phones used to contact victims, more than 200 internet searches about the Gilgo Beach investigation, and tied DNA found on a discarded pizza crust to hair found on one of the bodies. Police found the remains of 11 people in the area of Gilgo Beach, including a toddler. They are now looking at other unsolved crimes.
There's still an awful lot of investigation that has to be done to fully understand how many people were victims to this individual.
Prosecutors say they pushed up the time frame on the arrest because Heuermann was closely monitoring the investigation and was a danger to the community. He has pleaded not guilty to the murders of the 3 women.
And then on July 13th of 2023, Rex Heuermann is arrested in Manhattan at his Midtown office. Investigators matched DNA from hair recovered from the burlap sack that was used to wrap Waterman's body to leftover pizza crusts that Heuermann threw into Manhattan garbage can in January of 2023. They also were able to track him through cell phone records as well. Now, here's a little bit of a photo of just that Chevy Avalanche there at his home, parked out front, hiding right in plain sight. They did later find that Chevy Avalanche on one of his properties that he owned in South Carolina. So it does look as though perhaps he was trying to cover that up and move it.
Yeah.
So they said that the cell phone mapping actually led investigators to zero in on areas in Midtown Manhattan. Remember, we mentioned that before, and in Massapequa Park, which was where he lived.
Yeah.
See, look at him. He looks like a nice, regular, prominent businessman. He doesn't look full. They never do.
No, they don't.
So yeah, pizza box that he apparently had a habit of doing. He used to eat on the go a lot. They knew this about him. He used to eat a lot of pizza, so they had been following him around for a really long time. And he dumped it in a public garbage can, and they pulled it, did DNA testing on it, and his DNA matched the hair that was found on the bodies.
Yep.
Dun,
It's
dun,
amazing.
dun. And he had a massive collection of burner phones that they recovered as well. And then July 14th of this year, defense attorney Michael Brown entered a not guilty plea on Heuermann's behalf at his arraignment for 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder. He was held on no bail. And look at that fine haircut he got. That was actually something that was mentioned on a lot of streams that I watched with his appearance in court. They're like, what's with this? I don't know. It looks like he's just trying to get rid of his gray, but it is a little bit of an odd look.
Kind of makes you think of the dude on the Goonies.
Yes. So this is where they conducted searches of his home. They found a mountain of evidence, apparently. Evidence of interest, they call it. Several shots of them recovering the Chevy Avalanche. All kinds of files. This is his wife and his 2 children. That's Asa Ellerup, I believe is how her name was. Her name is Asa Ellerup, I believe is how her name is pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually been rumored that she may have known, or probably did know the entire time that he was addicted to escorts, knew about it, and kind of let it happen. So let's go over Rex's charges. So he has murder in the first degree for the death of Melissa Bartholomew, murder in the first degree for the death of Megan Waterman, murder in the first degree for the death of Amber Costello, murder in the second degree for the death of Melissa Bartholomew, murder in the second degree of Megan Waterman, murder in the second degree for the death of Amber Costello. Says, although he is not yet charged with the disappearance and murder of Mrs. Brainerd Barnes, he is the prime suspect in her death, and there is substantial evidence of his involvement. And so after the police spent 12 days looking through Heuermann's house, they pulled guns out of the basement. They were digging in the backyard. The other piece of important evidence that they took into their possession was the Chevy Avalanche that I said was found sitting on South Carolina property when they recovered it. He has a daughter and a stepson with his second wife, Asa Ellerup. She was born in Iceland, and she would take the children to see her family there in the summer times. And they think that when she took the family in the summer, the 2 kids, and he was left all alone, that's when these murders occurred. The timelines seem to be matching up.
Yeah. Gave him the perfect time slot to do it.
I know. While the wife and kids are away, the evil man will play. So investigations ended up spreading to South Carolina and Las Vegas, where Heuermann actually owns property. And detectives were taking a fresh look at cases of missing women there as well. He's not been charged with any additional investigations. Other items that might be of evidentiary value are the cell phone billing records that correspond to the locations for 1, the burner phones that were used to contact the victims to set up the meetings, and 2, taunting calls made to a relative of one of the victims, Melissa Bartholomew, and also voicemails that were checked on her phone after Melissa Bartholomew went missing. He also lived in Massapequa Park, where the victims are believed to have disappeared from. And this picture here is a picture that he was using when he was setting up escorts, taking selfies of himself.
Can we elaborate on the family member he was taunting?
Yes, it was Melissa Bartholomew's younger sister. He actually called her, I believe it was 2 weeks after she went missing, calling from Melissa Bartholomew's phone to her younger sister. And she answered the phone and said, Melissa. And he said, oh, no, this isn't Melissa. And asked her, do you know what I've done to your sister? And basically told her in detail how he had killed her sister.
And that pinged in Manhattan, didn't it?
Sure did. That was from one of the burner phones. And what they did was they compared the burner phones that were used to contact the girls to his cell phone once he became a suspect. And those burner phones, every time a call is made, are in the same spot as his phone. They also narrowed down calls to be in the same city block of his workplace.
Yeah. What'd they call it? The box?
Yes. Look at you. They did.
I told you I'm going to sleep to this stuff. But the one really sinister thing to me in the phone calls to the relative is that it was her younger sister, but she was like 14 or 15 years old. So he was tormenting a child.
And who knows? I mean, that's a very bold move to make. So it was either that he got some sort of sick satisfaction from actually tormenting the child, or was he trying to lure the child as well? Somehow, who knows? I mean, he didn't end up telling her that he killed her sister, but he definitely had a type. So one of the similarities in all of these girls, the ones that he's actually suspected of murdering, they're all extremely petite. Most of them were brunettes at the time. I know there's some pictures of some blondes in here, but and so a 6'4", 200 and some odd, who knows, maybe even 300-pound man, because he's a large dude. You know, you're going to select somebody that you think won't be missed. So that's why he was navigating through the sex worker world, and girls that can't fight back, that you just naturally would overpower extremely easily. So that's for the other bodies that were found near Gilgo Beach: Jessica Taylor, Valerie Mack, Karen Vergata, Peaches, and the toddler girl, the Asian male. None of them so far have been linked to Huerman directly. Now, we do have a little bit of information that's come out in the last couple of days that they do believe that he might be linked to Karen Vergata and also to Shannon Gilbert. So let's go through. This is just another sort of look as to where all of the red dots here on the Ocean Parkway are all victims. So the next court date is actually set for November 15th of this year. That will be interesting. So let's talk about Karen Vergata, who was known as Jane Doe for a really, really long time. There has been a recent report by an attorney. His name is John Ray, and he's attorney for several of the victims. He just recently did a press conference a couple of days ago. It's out there on YouTube, that he has statements from two separate witnesses about two separate victims. The first one being Karen Vergata. There's a story that was actually given. It was actually given in a sworn affidavit by a female who was also a sex worker who had apparently serviced Rex Huerman many, many times. She had a boyfriend, and they were about to go out to a swingers party with at Rex Huerman's house. Apparently, he used to throw swinger parties. They were on their way out there to go and hang out at the swinger party, and they ended up, her boyfriend somehow knew Karen Vergata, this girl who had just apparently recently been released from jail. She was hungry, and so they took her along with them. And at some point at this party, they decide to leave early. The couple decides to leave early, and they see Karen Vergata, or who they think is Karen Vergata, through a window in another room with Rex Huerman. And the girl says to her boyfriend, shouldn't we be taking her with us? And he says, no, they're just playing a game. It's fine. And then I guess while they're pulling out of the driveway and going to pull away from the location, she looks back and sees the girl again, naked and running out in front of his garage. And she says, shouldn't we go after her? And he says, don't worry about it. They're just playing a game. Let it go. And so pretty damning. And apparently at the swingers party, the wife was present as well.
What?
So that was in a sworn affidavit. Yes. Another statement that was given was from a taxi driver who had a call to pick up Shannon Gilbert. This is Shannon. Shannon was a sex worker and used the taxi service to pick her up from a motor lodge. So she had called looking for a ride, but had said, I'll only come out if the driver comes up and flashes their lights and honks their horn. Apparently, Shannon had been on a call at this motor lodge that I guess was sort of a popular place. I guess they were kind of busted for prostitution recently. So anyway, she had locked herself. She had gotten scared, locked herself in a bathroom, called the taxi. The taxi driver comes, pulls up, flashes light, honks the horn, does it several times and nothing happens. And then she describes what she sees as an ogre of a man, a huge man that walks in front of her car. He covers his face with his arms so that she can't see his face. And then he, goes over to a vehicle. And then a little while later, apparently, Shannon actually does come out and gets into her car and says, we have to get out of here, something to the effect of her being in fear for her life. So that's how they believe that she is now actually connected somehow to Rex Heuermann. Could it be unrelated completely? I mean, she was an escort, and if he was someone that was absolutely frequenting escorts on a regular basis, and he was getting them from Craigslist, it's possible that they could have come in contact, and maybe she got away that time, and maybe her meeting the Joseph Brewer guy out there was completely unrelated. But what a crazy coincidence!
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I'm trying to connect it in my head, and I just can't.
Yeah, not yet. And that's when I was saying earlier, I was kind of alluding to it, like maybe we'll get a little bit of information, because if they're going to pursue this link, I don't think it's a sworn affidavit from the taxi driver. I think it was just a statement. The actual sworn affidavit was about Karen Brigada, who was originally Jane Doe. But there's just been a lot of really strange things that have come out. This whole thing about his wife knowing about the escorts is a little bit mind-blowing to me, because the media had sort of portrayed her in the beginning as really being absolutely clueless and having no idea. And maybe she did have no idea he was doing these things, but apparently the statement was that he was regularly seeing escorts even while she was home. Like, she would be upstairs and he would have the escorts come inside their home, and she knew about it.
Isn't she ill?
She is. She has, I believe she's battling 2 types of cancer, skin cancer and breast cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she's lost all of his income. They actually had set up a GoFundMe page for his wife. I think she got something like $50,000 from it to be able to continue her treatments, because he was the main breadwinner and he owned his own architectural business. So in Manhattan, and apparently had a really good reputation. And you know what he was good for? His reputation was good for finding loopholes.
Yep.
So it's Rex Heuermann has a lot that's pointing to him as being guilty. He probably sloppily thought that burner phones would save him, but they were actually what damned him and got him caught. They were finally able to, and they had DNA all this time. They were just waiting. And so when they made that connection with him and the cell phones, the locations, that was it. They got the DNA and bam, arrested him. So we'll have to see what comes up. Obviously, he's not going to go to full-blown trial for a really long time, but it gives them more time. This story is huge now. It's been a big story for a long time, but now that new facts are being uncovered and arrest has been made, people recognize Rex Heuermann now. That's going to take some time to gather those statements and see if there's any validity to them, to see if they can link him to any more of these.
Yeah, they said they had something like 8 terabyte worth of material to share with the defense. Yeah.
Yeah. And, a lot of that is, the cell phone records, but also his internet searches. He was searching the cases to see how close law enforcement was to catching.
Oh, really? I didn't see that part.
Yeah. Yeah. He was most definitely constantly researching stuff about the case, but also researching the victims' families, trying to find the locations of the families, the mothers, the sisters, the daughters. Very creepy. So it's, if all this comes true and he comes to fruition, he's convicted, and it turns out that, yes, Rex Heuermann is 100% the Long Island serial killer, or at least one of them. It all makes sense. All of it sort of points to him, his terrible habits, his cell phone records. Now finding out he didn't have to hide his escorting from his wife. That's huge. Huge.
Yeah.
Of course she wouldn't suspect anything. If he's doing this with her permission, she probably wouldn't have suspected a thing.
Yeah, I was thinking when I brought up the point that she's ill, maybe that's why she didn't,
Good point.
because she couldn't perform.
Right.
So to keep him happy, whatever. I wouldn't do it. I don't share. But,
But then again, he was also the main breadwinner, and
mhm.
she was just sort of at his mercy. That's a really good point.
Yeah. They said also on the last thing I watched, said that the kids lost their jobs because of all this.
Yeah,
So
because they worked
she's
for
the
his
one.
company.
So she's the main one trying to take care of them, and she's ill. So
Well, her kids don't look that young, so it might be time for them to
yeah.
step up and help out mom. I mean, they were both old enough to have jobs. So I know it is
Mhm.
unfortunate when you're working for the family business and all of it crumbles down. It's
Mhm.
sad that there are people left in the wake. It's amazing for the neighbors. I mean, God, did you see the statements from the neighbors? They were just beside themselves. Go ahead.
As they were finding more and more remains, and then
Mhm.
all of a sudden there's a tiny Asian man dressed as a woman. I'm like, where the hell did he come from? So do you think that maybe he solicited that person, and when they got there, they didn't tell him that they were a man? They got there and he just lost it?
I think that's entirely possible,
Yeah.
but
'Cause I
also
was
possible in another, probably in other scenarios. Is it possible that someone else, solicited, found out it
yeah.
was a man? There was some speculation about whether or not the Asian man was actually a male prostitute and purposely dressed in female clothing, or if it was possibly some sort of humiliation or ridicule after the fact,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
which they weren't able to figure out.
Yeah.
It will be interesting to see as this case develops if they can get some more information, even on the backgrounds of the
Yeah.
people, because the Asian male's never been identified. And he was, they said, dead at least, I believe it was 5 to 10 years before he was
Yeah.
found.
Yeah.
So that means probably evidence is long, long gone. It'll
Yeah.
just be a matter of hopefully somehow matching him to a missing person someday.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say is a lot of these victims, they went to New York or whatever to make quick money to take back home and start a new life. Maybe he transplanted himself in that area as well. Or he came over, couldn't get work, like legit work, so had to turn to that because a lot of people do.
That's
And that's
impossible.
how
Yeah,
he got caught up in it. I'm
entirely
just
possible.
very curious about him. I'm really curious.
There's so many people in New York City and in the surrounding areas that get into sex work because they're out there trying to pursue their dreams. A lot of them have dreams of
Hmm.
stardom. Shannon Gilbert herself was an aspiring actress. She wanted to act.
Yeah.
And when you're out there trying to find that kind of work, you have to have something else as a steady income. And unfortunately, a lot of those girls, they're out there trying to be actors. They're very pretty. That's where they're going to easily get the kind of money that they would be making if they were getting, small acting gigs. And a lot of
Yeah.
times much, much more. It's sad. It's tempting. There's drugs involved. There's creeps and murderers involved. And one other thing too, that I hope happens is that if he's not responsible for these other murders, that the other cases don't fall by the wayside, that they still plan to pursue as diligently as possible the other
Yes.
deaths to find out. The mother and child, that's concerning.
Yeah.
There's a mother and a child that are missing somewhere. There's a family
And
that's missing them.
they don't know Peaches' name, do they still?
I'll have to look into that
Yeah.
because every time I kept saying Peaches, I kept feeling like maybe there had been a name revealed. I think Peaches was what she went by, and that's why they actually used that name in the media
Well,
so
I can
that
tell
she would
you
be recognized.
on one of them that I watched, they only found parts of her, and
Yeah.
she had a tattoo of a peach.
Oh, was that it? Is that why they called
Yeah,
her?
so they deemed her Peaches. I don't know if they've matched anything since then, but yeah, I've gone back as long as like 3 months. And so from 3
Okay.
months up until, what you told me today, the newer stuff, yeah, I saw that they had
They
deemed her
did not
Peaches.
identify her. They have not
Okay.
identified her. She was an African American woman. Her partial
Mhm.
remains were discovered in
Mhm.
1997. She became known as Peaches because of a tattoo of a peach on her left breast.
Mhm.
And then they discovered the remains of the toddler about 2 years old.
Do we want to get into the whole conspiracy about the police chief at the time and all of that? because they had these cases for years, and then they assembled that new task force. I think they said within 6 weeks. I could be wrong. You read 6 months, I
Oh, did I
think.
say 6 months? No, you were right.
Yeah,
It was 6 weeks. I misspoke.
that they honed in on him. And some of the things I watched, it's like
And you
the
think,
chief.
how did the police chief just let all of that go?
Yeah, I think somebody in one of the things I watched said that he had ties to escorts himself.
Yes.
Things like that. So yeah, because
Yeah,
he
and
never checked out the avalanche story or nothing.
he had some charges against him, actually. I'll have
Mhm.
to look back into that and dig into that, because you're right. That was a huge part of the story, because the police chief back then, there was a lot of suspicion around him and also the police force. There were a lot of girls that were being questioned, being asked, do you have any idea, before Rex Heuermann ever came on the radar? Do you have any
Yeah.
idea why this would have who would benefit from this? Do you have any clue? And they all just kept saying, look at the cops, look at the cops. So that made the investigation just incredibly muddy.
I'm sure that that's going to come up in the trial too, I bet.
Sure, maybe they should take a look at him for the other unrelated ones and see what would he have had to gain from not pursuing.
Yeah, because there was one ex-law person that called the new task force, I think, and said, look back at these remains found in 19 whatever that nobody ever looked into, and it actually led to one of the victims. So yeah, it's a crazy case, and I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, it's sad when you've got all of that stuff coming into play. I think, it was James Burke. I wanted to look up to see who was leading that investigation, who led that department. It was James Burke. He resigned in 2015, right before federal prosecutors charged him for violently assaulting a man in custody and trying to cover up the incident.
So is that Burke the Burke that Shannon was connected to?
No, that was Joseph Brewer.
Oh, Brewer. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, that was the man's house that she went to.
I almost had a eureka moment.
I know, you're like, wait, I've got to call the cops. Yeah, he was the police chief that led the investigation, or drug his feet on the investigation, however you want to look at it. I mean, maybe it could have been that, because people were saying to look at the police, if people were to actually start looking at the police, his own crimes would have been found out, which eventually were. But yeah, there was a lot of dirty dealings apparently in those years with the police department, and everyone was suspicious.
Yeah, it's sad though, because those families for all those years,
Definitely needed those answers.
Still hoping, and yeah, it's sad. But hopefully they'll get justice.
Absolutely. And you know what, Fanta, thank you so much for doing this with me. It was really nice to talk about this. I know we talked about this before. It's so hard when you get hooked on a case and you're sitting there kind of by yourself watching these videos and you're really getting into it, and you're like, I need a kindred spirit. I need somebody to reach out to talk to me about these details, because it'll like eat you up, because you're like into it and you want to know what's going on. You want to know what other people think. Do they think the same way I do?
I unloaded on my oldest son yesterday. He just happened to walk in here to bum a cigarette. And I'm just like 5 minutes straight, blah, 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 and this one, blah, 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 and that one, blah, blah. And he just goes, huh, and walked out. I'm like, I got to talk about it with somebody.
That's interesting, Mom. I do the same thing with my husband, who, is convinced that I just watch these as a way to find an easy solution to his demise without getting caught. But this is not true.
I call it educational television.
Exactly. He's getting used to. I heard you say earlier that people think it's crazy that you fall asleep to those shows, like the investigation shows, and I do the same thing. It's funny because I might have him coming around because he's always hated it. I can't fall asleep to this stuff. But then he was like, yesterday, he said, you know what, you're right. Very soothing. It's real quiet. Usually the scene is real dark. It's not real bright TV. It's just nice to have that monotone forensic files on while you're trying to ease off into sleep.
I don't know if it was you I said this to, or the girls before I came over here, but like I was laying here and I have my phone propped up, with the documentaries and all that running, and it went to Cold Case Files, something totally separate. And when I heard the guy's voice, I smiled. I actually smiled and said out loud, "It's Bill Curtis."
Isn't he great? I love him. Yes. His voice is the best.
Yes, I did. I actually smiled and said, "Bill."
I'm pretty sure he's the voice for Forensic Files too.
Yeah.
And there's something like 30 seasons of Forensic Files. You can
Oh yeah.
fall asleep to listening to Bill for the next year, probably.
Yeah. This
Well,
has
guys,
been awesome.
yeah, thank you, Fanta, for joining me. Thank you to everybody who's here watching the premiere. Please feel free to give us your comments as far as what you think is going on, or what you think about the case. Have you followed it? Have you not? What do you think the outcome's going to be? If you're watching it on the rewatch, leave us some comments and let us know. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And you'll see myself and Miss Fanta around here on YouTube somewhere. Everywhere.
Yep.
A little bit here and there. But thank you, Fanta,
Yep.
for joining me for this. It was so much fun. I'm really glad
Thanks
I got
for
to get this
having
off
me.
my chest. And I'm glad that you got to finally unload your thoughts.
Yes.
And we'll follow this case together, and we'll do some more updates as they come along. And stay tuned for some other cases. Still have some on the back burner that I really want to cover. So, Fanta, if you are free to join me for those, we'll go through that as well. And
Heck yeah.
maybe do another one of these together.
All right.